The BMW M2. Everybody loves this car. Chris Harris loves it. Doug DeMuro loves it. Motor Trend loves it. But what is this car like on a daily basis? So me, just a regular guy, I'm going to tell you. So this is not my car. I'm actually thinking about buying one. So I borrowed this one for a week. And I wanted to give you my initial impressions on this car. Just what a normal guy thinks and what this thing is like to live with on a daily basis. Because, you know, with much respect to those journalists I mentioned, they get to drive it on the track. They get to drive it on back roads. They don't maybe get to drive it every day. So they don't know what it's like to live with every day. So first and foremost, this is a phenomenal car. On the subject of styling, obviously styling is subjective, but I think it looks pretty cool. I don't think this is a car that is going to wow people unless you are an enthusiast. But for us enthusiasts, you know, we know what it is, we appreciate it. And I'm going to make a dangerous comparison. I'm going to compare it to the E30 M3. And before everybody kills me, my first car was a 1988 325IS E30 that I ended up modifying. Obviously, always wanted an M3, but you know, they were out of my range at the time when I bought my E30. And in photos, you know, you can't maybe really make that comparison, but after, you know, looking at this car for a week and looking at this huge rear bulge in the fender and from the back, it really is kind of boxy and kind of small, and reminds me a lot of the E30 M3 with, you know, some boxy styling and flared fenders. So it doesn't really pick up well in the photos or even on camera much, but I think if you see one in person and you drive one, you kind of see that this is probably what the E30 M3 would have evolved into. So I love the styling. Again, it's not flashy enough where it's going to cause a lot of attention. It's really not, you know, a beautiful car, but it's definitely better looking than the 1 Series, and I do think it is kind of like a modern day E30 M3. Moving on to the interior, you know, this is part of the E30 M3 comparison as well. It's so non-cluttered, and the seating position, it's kind of like a modern E30. Really, my only gripe with the interior is that the seats, I think, are kind of plain. Obviously, in the new M2 competition, they put the M4 seats in there. That might be a worthwhile upgrade when you can start finding M4 seats in salvage yards. But you know, that's probably a ways away, and who knows if that M4 seat will really fit. And, you know, well, I think the seat is a little plain looking. Obviously, I'm kind of nitpicking here, right? You know, the seating position is perfect. The seats are excellent. They hold you in great. I guess while we're on the subject, I know Jason over at Motor Trend complained that the seat is crooked. And he's right. You are kind of looking at the left headlight because the seat is twisted a little bit. But what I've noticed is that if you have your left foot on the dead pedal, you definitely notice that the seat is a little off center. But if you put your foot where the clutch pedal should be in this car, if it had a 6-speed, you really actually don't notice it. It's almost like BMW engineered this car for a seating position that was optimal to a manual transmission. So if you had a manual, I don't know that you would even notice it. As a matter of fact, when I first drove one of these, I drove a manual version, and I didn't notice it. I didn't notice it at all until I saw that Motor Trend video. So, you know, maybe just another reason to get the manual transmission. More on that later. As far as my biggest, I guess, surprise and biggest disappointment, I'm shocked at how well this car handles. A good buddy of mine has a job that we would all love. He, you know, works with exotic cars, and he gets to drive everything. Every exotic you can imagine, he gets to drive it. And he told me, he said that the M2 is so good that, you know, the only thing you can really compare it to are cars that cost 4 or 5 times as much. And after taking this through some back twisty roads, I was shocked at how well it handled. I knew it was going to handle well, but I didn't know it was going to handle that well. And I had driven a Porsche Cayman through this stretch of road before. I had driven a Ferrari 430. And, you know, this was not quite on the level of the Ferrari, but it wasn't that far off. And it's so much easier to live with on a daily basis. And it's so much cheaper than a Ferrari that, you know, are you really going to complain? You know, so for the M2 to get that close to a Ferrari in terms of handling on a back road is ridiculously impressive. Now, while it handles well, though, too, I was maybe just as surprised at how livable it is on a daily basis. I live here in San Diego near the beach, Mission Beach, if you know the area, and the roads here are awful. There's potholes, uneven roads everywhere. San Diego's kind of famous for having bad roads lately. And I was worried about, the car being too rough. I was worried about the ground clearance. And it hasn't been an issue. I've gone over some pretty gnarly roads and pretty gnarly bumps, and the car has really soaked it up well. So, and then I should mention too that, the Ferrari 430 that I drove and the Cayman that I drove, that was not the case. I could not live with either of those cars on a daily basis. It would be the Cayman, the ground clearance was too low, same with the Ferrari. And, I was just worried that I was going to bottom out. I did probably bottom out a few times with both of those cars. With this, it hasn't happened yet. So for this car to be comfortable enough to drive daily, but yet still handle so close to an exotic or a Porsche on those back roads, it's amazing how well BMW dialed in this suspension. So that was my biggest surprise, was the handling and how comfortable it is and how well it handles. Biggest disappointment by far is the iDrive and the audio system and the entertainment system. I could go on a 10-minute rant on this. It is so awful. I mean, it's just terrible. My other car is an Infiniti Q50 non-sport is my daily. And, the entertainment system in that car is so easy to use and so intuitive. This is just so complicated and complex and just such a pain. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking with this car. And at first I thought I just might not be familiar with the system. But I mean, just organizing your music on this thing, to get the right song to play, you've got to take your eyes off the road. It's unbelievably distracting and complex. And there's just too many ways to organize it, too many features. I mean, I don't know. I know that many of the automotive journalists say that iDrive is the industry leader and all that. I absolutely hate it. I hate the systems in these cars. These are too damn complex. And even for a 2 Series, right, which is supposed to be like back to basics, come on, make something simple with this car. If I did buy one, I know there's some people that have, retrofitted, like the Tesla screen and some other cars. I wonder if that would be an option on this, because this system is garbage. The audio system is a pain. And navigation as well. The phone integration isn't too bad, but on the subject of navigation, how come none of these car companies can make a navigation system that is halfway as good as Google Maps? I mean, when I'm breaking up my phone to look at Google Traffic and Google Maps, and when Google Navigation gives me better navigation than this, come on, BMW. I pay $800 for a smartphone. I pay 60 to 80 grand for a BMW. Get it right. So the audio system was by far, and the entertainment system is the biggest turnoff for me on this car. It almost is enough to make me not want to buy it, especially when there are other companies that do it right. I'm not an Infiniti fan, but you know what? Infiniti has it right with how easy it is to use that damn system. So these other companies should take note of that. I'll also mention as well, obviously I said I own a Q50. The Q50 is really comfortable to drive on a daily basis. This obviously is not as comfortable, but the trade-off, to get back to the handling department, is not that bad on a daily basis. This going over the rough roads that my Infiniti goes over, it's not as comfortable. The seats are more firm, the suspension's firm, but the trade-off is so worth it, because the Infiniti can't handle a twisty road to save its life. This is phenomenal. So, again, I just wanted to go back and throw that in there. Last but not least, we'll talk about the power. Now, the most overrated thing with this car is people say that, the engine sounds so good. And it sounds pretty good. But, they make such a big deal of how this engine sounds, and it doesn't sound that special. A Ferrari 355, that sounds special. A Pagani Zana with the, unfiltered, naturally aspirated Mercedes V12, that is a special sounding car. Even the previous generation M5 and M3 with the V10 and the V8, that sounds great. Hell, even an SL55 with the supercharged V8, that's one of my favorite engine notes of all time. It sounds good, But, you know, people say this sounds so much better than the new, you know, M4 engine or the, you know, the engine in the M2 competition, that new straight six. You know, other than the fact that that engine makes, you know, those backfiring sounds, I don't really see that much of a difference. If you were somehow able to eliminate the backfiring from the new BMW straight six, I don't really see how this sounds, you know, that much better. I mean, it sounds good. It doesn't sound bad, but it's not like special. You know, so I don't know. If people are talking about choosing this car because how it sounds, you buy an M5, a previous generation M5 with the V10. You buy an M5 for the sound. You buy the E92 M3 with the V8 for the sound. You buy a 355 Ferrari for the sound. You don't buy an M2 for the sound. So I don't know. That's just my opinion, but I'm gonna state it. As far as power goes, you know, all cars these days are so fast, it's hard to talk about the subject of power, really. But I do feel like on the freeway, you know, obviously on the freeway, this car is great. But top-end acceleration, I do feel it is maybe a little bit behind on some other cars. So, you know, now that these are coming out of warranty with the old engine, tunes are really going to be probably popular, right? You can do the juice box or dine-in. Personally, I'm partial to ESS. I think ESS has the best tunes in the market. But, you know, when you add a tune to this car, it's definitely going to help on freeway acceleration. And it's also going to probably make this old M2 with the, you know, with the N54, I think is what they call it, you know, it faster. It just is faster than the M2 competition with the newer twin turbo 6. But the problem with that is that if you tune this car, while you are going to make it faster on the freeway and give it more power, give it faster, you know, fourth mile times and all that good stuff, first gear as it is already pretty worthless. I can't imagine what this car is going to be like with an extra 60, 70, 80 wheel horsepower. Because right now when you're in first, once you get to about 4,000 RPM, forget it, you got to shift. Because those rear tires are going to break loose and all you're going to do is just spin the rear. So, you know, just something to keep in mind. If you're thinking about tuning this car, great. You know, freeway pulls are going to be a lot more fun. But, you know, first gear is going to be even more worthless. As soon as you hit boost, you're going to have to shift, or you're going to maybe have to get stickier rear tires. But, you know, I'm not sure what these are. I didn't bother to look, but I'm not even sure how wider you can go. So that's the other thing I wanted to mention, you know, on the tuning department. So anyway, overall, I love this car. It's fantastic. You know, I was really thinking about buying one, and I still am. Trying to decide between this or an M4. I'm kind of partial to the C63 with the new V8. I am kind of partial to the old Mercedes R231 with the twin turbo V12. All my friends make fun of me for that and call me an old man, but you know, I love that car and I love the power that it has. Last but not least, I'll say this. Final impressions on this car is that it is a lot of fun and very, very good. And definitely something that I would like to buy shortly, especially now that they've started to depreciate a little bit. But of course, this car had the DTC. The first time I drove one of these, it had a manual transmission, and after that experience, I thought this was a phenomenal car. I mean, I had to have one. I was ready to do something really, really stupid at the dealership before I talked myself out of it. So, does the manual transmission make that much of a difference? The answer is yeah, it does. I would definitely get one of these with the manual. You know, the DTC is pretty cool for daily driving. It's probably a better option, but for the driving experience goes, again, I was just overwhelmed with happiness when I drove that car with the manual. It just felt so right, and I hadn't driven a car that fun in a long time. With this, it still is fun, but it just doesn't feel as special with the twin clutch transmission. So something to consider. Anyway, I am not an automotive journalist like Doug DeMuro. I am not a race car driver like Chris Harris, and I am not independently wealthy like Alejandro. But I am just a normal guy who loves cars and likes having, you know, one or two kind of cool toys. So let me know if you want to see more kind of normal guy car reviews like this. If you do, I will start doing this more often. If I get a lot of views on this and if people like the video, I will start reviewing cars more often to give you something that's maybe a little bit more different than, you know, somebody balling out of control or somebody drifting this on the racetrack or somebody spending 20 minutes on quirks and features. Nothing wrong with quirks and features, but I don't know. I was hoping to make this a little bit more concise and quick. So anyway, that is my review of the BMW M2. I may add one to my garage soon, or I may go with an M4, or I may go with something completely different. But overall, phenomenal car, something that you could definitely live with on a daily basis, and something that has a great balance of sportiness and daily usability. So that is it for now. Until next time.